Hey folks, hope you all are doing well. I'm Karan Bandal from Econosite, your weekly wrap on economic news from India and around the world. So let's get started with India. Role of PLI schemes in India's solar projects in the power sector. We need to understand some top level numbers first. India currently generates power or electricity through sources like coal, nuclear, solar, wind, hydropower and others, with coal being the primary energy source. India has a total installed capacity of roughly 400 gigawatts. India's economy is projected to grow at around 7% in the medium term, and so will its energy needs. Therefore, India needs to increase its installed power capacity from 400 gigawatts to roughly 750 to 800 gigawatts by 2030, depending on the growth rate assumption for the power demand. Most of this new capacity will come from renewable sources, since India has committed to achieve net zero emissions level by 2070. In line with that, India has set an ambitious target of installing 280 gigawatts of solar capacity by 2030. Currently, or as of September 2022, India has a total installed solar capacity of 60 gigawatts. So, adding 220 gigawatts of solar capacity in 8 years is a challenge in itself. On top of that, India aims to achieve this goal through domestically manufactured modules or solar panels. Presently, when a company installs solar power plant in India, they import solar panels and relevant components from China. Going forward, India wants to manufacture not only the modules or solar panels, but also the solar cells that make up a module. And this is where government's PLI schemes attempt to move the needle. PLI stands for Production Linked Incentives. The two PLI schemes in this space that were launched starting in November 2022 have resulted in around 48 gigawatts of domestic module manufacturing capacity that will be added in just the next 3 years. As many as 11 companies have bagged PV module manufacturing projects under these schemes, including names like Reliance, Renew, First Solar, Tata Power Solar and so on. India already had 18 gigawatts of module manufacturing capacity as of December 2021. So, in the next 3 years, India's cumulative module manufacturing capacity will be around 66 gigawatts. So, what about the cell? India is a little behind here. India's solar cell manufacturing capacity is estimated to go from 4.7 gigawatts currently to about 33 gigawatts in the next 2 years. The two PLI schemes cost government about $2.2 billion, but it is expected that as a result of these domestic manufacturing projects, India will save around $13.7 billion in import bill. And these projects are expected to create 100,000 jobs. Now let's go to fossil fuel, India and the Russian oil. India's problem with oil is that it imports around 85% of the oil the country needs. Before Russia-Ukraine war, India's main oil suppliers were in the Middle East. Post-war, the West began imposing sanctions on Russian oil, effectively taking that oil off the market in phases. Normally, this would have caused the global oil prices to shoot up as a major supplier is taken offline while the demand keeps growing. And to some extent, this is happening for the European consumer. India, on the other hand, has resisted Western pressure to freeze out Moscow. In fact, India has accelerated its Russian oil purchases in phases from 70,000 barrels per day before the war to 1.62 million barrels per day for the month of March 2023. Russia now is India's #1 oil supplier. As a result, India has saved $3.6 billion in the 10 months after the outbreak of the war. It is reported that India is buying Russia's flagship Ural crude well below the $60 per barrel price cap introduced by the G7 in December. India is not the only beneficiary though. India has 23 oil refineries refining 249 million tons of oil a year, making it the world's 4th biggest refiner. Now, much of this refined product goes to the Indian consumer, but thanks to a surplus, India is now exporting this refined oil, that is petrol and diesel, some of it refined from Russian oil, to Europe, who has boycotted Russian oil. India's petroleum product exports to EU rose 20.4% year on year between April and Jan 23 to 11.6 million tons. This is allowed since under the EU rules, refined products are not deemed to have come from Russia. and it helps the EU consumer who is reeling under high inflation already by easing some supply pressure. As things stand now, Russia earns less than it did before the war. EU pays elevated price for the oil but not so high that it will fall into a deep recession, while India benefits through moderate inflation for its people, higher refining profits for its firms, and energy security for the nation as it remains a neutral party in this conflict. In a way, India is also helping to keep global oil prices lower than they would have been if Russian oil had gone completely offline. Finally, on to OPEC. OPEC Plus announces surprise cuts. OPEC stands for the Organization of the Oil Exporting Countries. This group has 13 members from Middle Eastern and African countries. OPEC was formed in 1960 as a cartel with the aim of fixing the worldwide supply of oil and its price. In 2016, 10 more members were added to this group, including Russia, and OPEC became OPEC Plus. The group meets regularly to decide how much crude oil to sell on the world market. OPEC Plus countries produce about 40% of the world's crude oil, which gives the group plenty of leverage. Saudi Arabia, Russia, and their oil-producing allies announced on April 2nd that they would cut production by more than 1.2 million barrels of crude a day. The global oil market is roughly 102 million barrels a day. So this OPEC Plus decision aimed at increasing prices takes out about 1% of the supply. Saudi Arabia and Russia will lead in making the announced cuts with declines of 500,000 barrels each. These cuts are set to begin in May 2023. This also indicates that Saudis are growing independent from the United States with its relationship in China increasing in importance. They are moving their oil production decisions with a clear eye to their own economic self-interests. The global inflation problem has not resolved yet, and this development certainly does not help the issue. In summary, we saw India's PLI schemes paying rich dividends in the mobile manufacturing space, where in financial year 2022-23, India's mobile phone exports hit a record high. It appears a similar impact might be seen in solar cell and module manufacturing sector also. India's take on Russian oil after Russia-Ukraine war began appears to be a sound foreign policy decision where not only India is benefiting but the world at large as well, since the global inflation problem that we are facing would have been much worse had it not been for India's surplus refined oil. But the surprise announcement by OPEC Plus last week is likely to keep this inflation fire burning in the near term. I hope you found this week's wrap interesting. I'll speak with you again next week. Until then, take care.